looks that much richer, doesn't it, when it's raining outside?
Christmas is coming. And, we were talking about a Christmas special, weren't we?
We were. But as everybody knows, you're not allowed to discuss Christmas until my birthday's happened on the 8th of December. Them the
Absolute
rules.
shout out to your birthday.
Them the rules, yeah.
Them the rules. Okay, right. Well, we're now... I was going to say something much ruder. We're now inside episode 6. Episode 5.
That's 6.
Is it episode 6?
Yeah.
I should be much better at counting than that. There we go.
We toasted episode 5 earlier.
Cheers to episode 6, guys. We're on a roll. Cheers. So, episode 6, the positively titled Failure. Yeah, failure is Ben's ability to get the background together.
There we go.
So we're going to talk about failure today, but I think we're going to frame it in a failure positive light. I think someone once said to me that you may have said to me, it's sort of getting over your fear of failure is one of the most impressive things you can do with your
I
life.
definitely said that to you, but I don't know if I don't think it's an original thing. But I think that fear of failure is even more acute now than it's more ever been, because people watch what you do online or at work, or you're constantly posting. And once people realize you're not sensitive, I'm a terrible dancer, but because people know that I'm not frightened of dancing badly, when I get up and start dancing badly, there's a bit of pointing, sure,
Yeah.
but like only people that haven't seen me before.
As Lucy walks out the room and is like, I can't watch. But one of the reasons we very firstly did this podcast was you were like, if the only reason we're not doing it is because we're worried it might not work, then we're 100% doing it. We're
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
What was your acronym for it?
Well, the 2 C's, the I, and the... No, but I do think that thing of your boundaries can become much closer by accident, because you don't do certain things in case you fail. You don't do that in case other things happened. And, it's that old phrase like, cowards die many times before their death, the valiant taste of death but once. Like, the things you dread aren't the things that get you. Just get on with it and it'll be fine.
I really like that.
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't
I
expecting
thought I was going to get the posh alarm for that.
Well, I was going to, but I was so like, what a beautiful quote, Bill. Can I say, just as this isn't naturally to do with failure, but I was reading a lot about failure in architects who have failed and done well. And one of the ones that came up, Rem Koolhaas, he's a big risk taker who happens to do these amazing projects. But one of his quotes was about how you shouldn't be afraid of failure. That was how I got onto it. But he had this really beautiful quote about architecture, which I just like the quote you said, because we were talking about big ideas last week, and I think we all agreed that we could do an entire one season on big ideas. I think we all said
Next season.
I think next season, yeah, any one of them could have been really good. But so Rem Koolhaas said, architecture stands with one leg in a world that's 3,000 years old and another leg that's in the 21st century. This almost ballet-like stretch makes us profession surprisingly deep. You could say that we're the last profession that has a memory of the last profession whose roots go back 3,000 years and who demonstrates the relevance of these long roads today. And I thought, what a wonderful quote. I thought if you're going to drop a beautiful piece of Latin scripture, I'm going to drop a Rem Koolhaas quote. But I thought that was really nice. So this isn't a negative podcast. This is a positive.
Well, it might be. I mean, failure is painted as, success happens once and failure happens loads of times. That's the sort of problem I have with it, that your only successful relationship is the person you perhaps marry or spend longest with. But I think that kind of discredits your school girlfriend or your university romance, or they were perfect, like I was about to say fit for purpose, but like a perfunctory way of describing some of the loves of my life. But I think that thing of the appropriate thing at the appropriate time, because it ended, doesn't mean it's a failure. That thing about all political lives end in failure, because a relationship ends, or a job ends, or I don't know. It doesn't mean it was a failure. There were good things there, and you see it in the kind of obvious examples of Dyson being refused by hundreds of people, or famous musicians not getting their record deals and then making it big. They're not failures. They're sort of iterative efforts. And I think certainly in the design world, that's how we should look at it. And maybe this is like an iterative process for our podcast success. So I think not not taking yourself so seriously that you treat it as a failure.
Oh, so I totally agree. And when we were doing our university projects, it was all about you've got to get to that point where you're so terrified of failure that you become your most creative, I think, when you're right on the edge of like, I've got nothing for tomorrow. And then suddenly in 12 hours, you'll do more useful work than you have done in 3 weeks. And there's this amazing...
the same still is true of preparing speeches or lectures.
Yeah.
You know, it's miles, it's a week, it's months off, then it's weeks off, then it's days off. And suddenly it isn't, it's hours off.
Yeah.
And
pressure's on.
Yeah.
Well, I think so kind of perfectly encapsulated. There's, if you like films, I've been obsessed with this podcast called The Rewatchables, and it's all about Jaws. But the point was that Steven Spielberg had spent all this money on a shark that didn't work, and he had to, at the nth moment, redo the entire film based on never seeing the thing that he wanted to spend an enormous amount of money on. And that became the very signature of the film and all of his films since. And I love that metaphor. And I think that a lot of our architecture projects, you know, you do an idea, it's not great. You do another idea, it's okay, it gets thrown around, people hate it. But it goes around and around and around. And the terrifying thing that I don't know how you can... I used to tutor first years when I was in sixth year. How do you tell a student, just don't worry about failing completely, but keep working through it? Don't worry when it gets really bad, just to the point you think you should stop. You just got to work through that.
It so depends on the person. Someone will be like, "Oh, great, cool. Oh, don't worry about that," and you're like, "No, you, Clive, should be worried about it." It's the other really self-motivated self-starters that don't need to worry about it.
But so obviously when we do our internet research for this podcast, a lot of it came up with failures in architecture and where should we go and what should we talk about? And I wanted to kind of talk about projects that maybe were seen as failures when they first started and are now completely transformed how people's perception of them is. And actually there's more character in those failures, and they have a bigger tradition now, I think, and they're more popular because of their kind of almost obvious failure. And one of the big ones, a project that you and I both love, Centrepoint, which is at the bottom of Tottenham Court Road on Oxford Street.
You're going to say Centre Parks for a minute?
I do not love Centre Parks.
Do you not?
I absolutely despise it, yeah.
Really?
Can I tell you why?
Go on then.
It's a very short story. I went there with our NCT group, and I got a bout of the norovirus, as did a few other people in that same apartment.
You made such close friends with your NCT group. You went on a holiday with them to Centre Parks. That's the takeaway from that story.
They're just a lovely bunch of people.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you still friends with them?
Yeah, I was going out to drink from them next Wednesday, but I can't because of the podcast. I literally just sent them, I'm doing a podcast.
They're like, la-di-da.
Yeah, it's really good, but I got ridiculously ill, and I absolutely despise it.
Well, apparently they are smashing it.
Oh,
They've got more money than they know what to do with. They're planning 7 further sites in the UK. They just don't know where to put the money. Everyone's...
You know Brookfield have bought them. They own Centre Parks.
Really?
Yeah.
Doesn't surprise me.
So
Anyway,
back to Centrepoint, a project that we both, I love, and they've just changed into residential flats. But what I thought was
And
really...
they can't sell them.
I know. But you know
Are
what?
we allowed to talk about this?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
it's in the public domain.
It's in the public
So
domain.
they refurbished it. I'm sorry if I've taken over there, but
No.
they've made them these incredible apartments, and they've just stood down. I think we did mention it. They've stood down the agents, so you can still buy one, but people are offering such low sort of sums for the flats that they've decided to stop selling them effectively. I think I'd mentioned that.
And but what's nice is that is completely mirrored in when it first came out. So it was built in 1966, and when they built it as an office, they would only lease it to one person, and no one wanted to rent it. So for about 2 years, it was empty. And it was seen, because the reason it's so tall, because if you're not familiar with Centrepoint, it is this amazing kind of concrete, very thin but concrete clad skyscraper in the city, but there's no other tall buildings around it.
And it's not in the city, it's at the bottom of Tottenham Court Road.
Sorry,
so
in London, which is a city, in the middle.
It's in the West End, yeah.
But it's unique because it has 360-degree views. But what's cool about it is that the reason they were allowed to build so much is they redid all the roads around the bottom of it. But what happened was no one wanted to move in there. So there was a man, you'll have to check this on Wikipedia, but a man. He took over the building. So he got 2 of his staff to go and work in the security team that were looking after the security of the building. They looked after it at night, and they allowed it for a weekend, and they took over the building to highlight homelessness. And that is where the homeless charity Centrepoint became and originated from, because so many people were living in the bottom of it, which I just like the idea that when this came out, it seems a total failure. and it didn't lease very well, and now suddenly they've changed
I
it.
would love to live in Centrepoint.
Oh, it's-
I mean, honestly, I can't think of anything better.
I'm with you, 100%.
If this really flies, this podcast,
Yeah, yeah.
with the proceeds.
And hopefully this goes down enough
We
that
can
we
have,
meet halfway and we get it's coming up. Talking of failures, Bill, what do you think of the new Foster's Tulip project? Bring up an image.
That's not, well,
It's
too
not a
soon.
failure.
It's too soon
If,
to be a... Why have you've chosen that just because we were talking about it earlier?
The reason I bring it up was because a certain Mr. Wainwright did a little review of it in The Guardian, and he absolutely despises it. I was just interesting about these iconic buildings that get bad press. It's
So
an
that's
instant failure.
not,
It's not a failure as such.
it's not a failure. It's not even anything yet. I mean,
That is a terrible image of it. But someone said it looks like a sex aid with some additional bits and pieces on it.
so I guess the thing is, I'm not a naysayer. I like tall. I like dense. I don't
Fit for
mind iconic with the inverted commas buildings. I just think kind of like why, it's. This is a big commercial district, and one of the reasons people go high is this argument that we all need to work here. We need to be close to, proximate to all the other industries and the people that we're doing business with. So that is why you go tall, coupled with the fact that it's this kind of ancient street map of the city, extruded up, creates all these crazy angular geometries and then severe sort of streetscapes, and that's unique. New York's on a grid, other places are low rise. We have this, and this feels like a kind of tourist attraction in the middle of it. A sort of Marks Barfield, who I love. I did the Brighton 360 and the London Eye and all these amazing things, but it feels this sort of touristic thing, bang in the middle of the financial district, and I think it looks a bit incongruous, but that was my first pass. And actually, when the Shard was first sort of went up, I was thinking, crikey, and and I love that. So I'm reserving judgment.
The only reason I brought it up, and I know you think I've gone on a tangent, is I'm fascinated with this idea of architectural failure, quote unquote, and buildings that weren't initially loved and are loved later on. And Norman, if you're listening, I love it.
So do I, if you're listening.
He'll be listening, obviously. Okay, so I really liked the Centrepoint story because I think it kind of, in terms of failure, we're sticking with architecture now on this podcast, but we can talk about people haven't invented time travel or Jurassic Park DNA, and that's a failure of technology.
Yeah,
So, but there's also, if we're sticking in the realms of architecture, there's the fear of failure. I also like the projects, some of them that have never gone ahead, that failed to get off the ground. And
it's that thing of, though, does something fail if it's shifted the conversation dramatically in the right direction, whether that's a political idea or an architectural idea, or whether that's Archigram, they didn't build things. And failure is, in whose eyes, you might, that old thing of like shoot for the moon and you'll end in the stars. Like you've started something. You're kind of Rosa Parks, and you got dragged off, and you started this huge movement. There are a lot of small elements in architecture and design or urbanism that have led to where we are now. And I'm thinking, like, off the top of my head, about cycling, or we touched on veganism. These things that were just marginalised. I remember we had a neighbour when I was young, and he'd cycle to work, and Martin, if you're listening. But it was a bit of a sort of bonkers thing to do. Come rain or shine, he'd cycle off, but it was okay because he was a kind of viola player for the Royal Philharmonic, and he was a bit nuts. Now everyone, well, nearly everyone I know cycles to work, and so that shift of, I don't know, like, but things that might be perceived as a failure are actually just the start of a big macro.
But one of the things I like about YouTube and Instagram and all those things, you can fail quick, fail early. You can do it. It doesn't go as well.
Cheap.
Exactly. That's something we talked about at lunch, isn't it? Fail cheap. Just get it out there, just do it and see what happens. Get to the point that you want to get to as cheaply and as quickly as possible. And the entry requirements are they're not as extreme as they once were, and you can experiment. Hobbies have exploded. I think, like You can learn the guitar, learn to paint, do everything via YouTube. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Yeah, that's certainly true. There's an amazing book that people will have read called The Lean Startup, which covers this point, which is rather than sitting in your bedroom and investing tens of thousands of pounds on this project, just get a minimum viable product to get together and on the market, because the first people that uptake it will be the most forgiving, will give you this feedback, and it'll be some sort of satellite or appendage. So I think some people just don't feel failure. It's about what your peer, like the perception your peer group are judging you and laughing at you. And I guess the older you get, the less time you have to care what your peer group think, because you're cleaning up shit on the chair, around the stairs, or you're in hospital dealing with like bronchiolitis, for example. So you don't have that time. You just want that energy to all be focused on a really positive thing. And actually, people aren't sitting around at home sniggering about Ben's failed podcast. I guess for both of you.
But
I think that's the reality, isn't it? It's that people don't think about you as much as you think they might.
So true. But for me personally, it is fear of your peer group kind of sniggering away at doing stuff. And I remember so many times doing university projects and thinking, oh, it's not good enough. And you just do it. And everyone's like, I've got my own architecture project. It's fine. What are you worrying about? And you're like, why did I worry about that so much? But there is that. Is an experience. University is amazing for that. It's terrifying.
It's a sort of hotbed, isn't it? Because you're kind of competing in architecture school, but you're also competing for, in love as well. And you're kind of going to the same house parties, and you're all trying to decide who you are and what your identity is and what you're good at and what you're bad at. And
is she fit for purpose? All of these.
If you're listening and you're a former
FPF.
But that thing is, it's a sort of melting pot, and your confidence is so wrapped up in who you are and the work you produce, whereas you're a bit more sort of steady. So you should take bigger risks, I guess.
Exactly. Should people take bigger risks?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've always thought that, but then maybe we all don't. We all feel the security from something, don't we? Whether that's like a family base or a friendship or I don't know.
I have a theory, and I'm aware that I go off on tangents regularly, so do rein me back in very quickly. I think if you play lots of sports when you're younger and through secondary school, you learn to deal with failure a lot
because of defeat and
I'm going to take a risk, do a free kick, smash that in, do a volley. It didn't go very well. Actually, no one minded. You just carry on. You can build up this like image of what you think the perfect person you should be is. But if you do these things and it didn't go well, it did go well. I won. It actually didn't mean anywhere near as much as I thought it would. I lost, didn't mean as much. And
there's an interesting idea there that actually, if you have some success, it can stop you having further success, because you're thinking, I've had more to risk. I'm the world champion, or on a micro level, I'm this big hero at sport at school. If I then go and do something else, I'm a failure. It'll destroy that previous reputation I had. So it's sort of, don't be afraid to give up the good to go for the great. Don't. You're not risking anything by just trying something new.
Yeah, and we also you've touched on this before as well. That this idea of doing electives in life, as in have a main thing and then a side thing that you're interested in, like a podcast, for example. But in terms of not taking risks, but one of the projects that I always love is the Richard Rogers What London Could Be. He did this whole series of these amazing, really evocative images of how you could change London. And I think one of the reasons I like the fact that Foster's have done that crazy thing is because they've actually gone and done it. It's one thing to do a sketch and do a render, but actually to put it in for planning and get money for it, you're like, oh, it's quite impressive. But I liked that he did this amazing idea of what London could look like. He was going to pedestrianise all of Embankment and put all the roads underground and build this amazing bridge that connected the north and south part of the river. And I was like, yeah. But it never got built.
No, but if you visualise it, it makes it easier for that conversation to happen. If you're the person that says, let's suspend a cycle superhighway, above the embankment and all the way, if you kind of visualize it, then people that aren't good at visualizing it but are good at delivering it or financing it, then they can get behind it. And I think that was, the Garden Bridge thing. It was people visualizing it, and then other people trying to make it happen in a political sphere. Well, I mean, it's a bit of a
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to bring that up.
contentious issue, but actually, you don't have to do everything. So there was a architecture practice who I should know who proposed a kind of Lido pool in the Thames. And the image
Studio Octopi.
Studio Octopi.
Interview them on the podcast.
Did you?
Yeah.
And they, it's a pretty mad idea, but it was, the images were so good you could imagine it happening, and it started this conversation. Again, it didn't happen, but that's not a failure. The Garden Bridge isn't a failure, although there were a large amount of public funds seem to have gone into that. They could well have become a Millennium Bridge or an O2 Centre, and actually, we talk about the O2 Centre. That was the Millennium Dome and Tony Blair, and God, what a waste of public money, and it's only going to be up for 2 years, and I cannot believe we're doing this. To pretty much the only venue of that size, something is happening there every night of the week. It was tennis earlier this week. It's music. It's drama. It's circus. It's it's been a tremendous success, and it was a political kind of laughing stock at the time.
I just have a little fist bump. So I had here Garden Bridge, failure or not failure. I've got a huge thing about the Olympic 2012 thing, and also I was going to talk about Studio Octopi's.
Is that bad? I'm just like...
No, it's really good because you brought it up. But for those of you who don't know, Studio Octopi did this amazing competition called a swimming pool in the Thames, and they wanted to use a floating swimming pool that would allow people to swim in the Thames like historically you could before you died of pollution, poisoning of some description. And it's gone so well. They've done other ones around the world, and it was a Kickstarter campaign, and that was one of the most exciting things to me. Was they got money outside of normal funding revenue streams and they crowdsourced it basically, and I thought that was a really cool idea.
How far did they get with that?
They've still not got permission to build it in the Thames, because the Thames is such a busy, it's basically a motorway. I did my thesis projects on the Thames, and the amount of ships that use it, transport boats as a motorway, is unbelievable. It's such a dangerous river to put anything in. It's like putting a swimming pool on the side of the M5. You just not going to happen. So I think they're still trying to do it. They're doing it in other places, but they're trying to use it as a regeneration project, and it's really cool. And then the Garden Bridge, I thought that would work really well until you had to pay to go on it, and you couldn't go on it. You couldn't go there at 3:00 in the morning with your mate and have a nice or a romantic walk on it. You'd have to pay. It was shut at 11. It was basically a toll bridge, and I think that's why.
Yeah, we have a sort of hot topic about privately owned public space in London and how that's managed, and we see it in loads of places around the city, to Broadgate, to the West End, and this idea that real life can't happen because homeless people have moved on, and they close it once a year to prevent any rights of easement happening across it. But it feels open. But is it Disneyland? Is it a bit kind of American? Do I say it?
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing. And when you say you build a building and you put a roof terrace on as part of your planning conditions, and you say it's for the general public, well then what? They've got to queue up, and they've got to get in a lift, and you can say, no, not you, you can come in.
Security check you back.
All of that, then that's quite discriminatory. And you were going to have to book and go across in groups, and if you were more than 12, and that takes all the fun out of it, of thinking, let's skip across the bridge. Like the Millennium Bridge, the Wobbly Bridge,
one of my favourites.
Because that's it's called the Wobbly Bridge because that was that
great failure story.
Is that like a failure because it wobbled? No, it crystallised it in the sort of Brits' imagination as not the perfect bridge. Who's going to love that? The Wobbly Bridge. Don't call my jeffing bridge wobbly. People relate to that.
I went for drinks with an Arup engineer who worked on that with Foster's, and they were like, God, he's like, between you and me, how on earth? Because how can you predict what the frequency of 10,000 people would do? I mean,
you absolutely should be able to predict that.
Yeah.
But you didn't mention the engineer.
No. But I just, is that a failure? I mean, we're very...
Well, they did loads of work
to say failure, aren't we, on this? Was the Garden Bridge a failure? There you go. Riddle me that. I think it failed.
I think it did. It failed in that it left a lot of bad vibes. It wasn't one of these failures which led to disruption and a new solution. It showed that actually there wasn't always due process in how some of these projects are rewarded. But equally, and we're getting slightly onto planning and more contentious things, but you should be allowed to be rewarded for coming up with ideas. If you say, I think we should do a bridge with plants in it from here to here, and you start engaging with the stakeholders, there's a reticence to then say, yeah, you can have it. You almost need to say, well, because of procurement procedure and, dare I say it, EU directives and, in the name of fairness and for all the right reasons, you then have to open it out. And the people that conceived it and designed it are marginalized. That does seem a shame that we're so sort of apprehensive that we can't ever just award something. And there has been a bit of a movement in this direction about how kind of innovative infrastructure can be applied without having to then re-procure it. And I think that would be. I mean, it's quite a big idea, but just coming up with ideas and people buying them and just proceeding with them.
Well, I was going to say, because I think, let's have a little dream, a big idea. Let's imagine in a couple of years' time, this podcast has hundreds of thousands of listeners, and we come up with an idea that really captures people's imagination. And they're like, yeah, why wouldn't you do that? And then suddenly there's a few planning people who listen to the podcast and they really like it. And they're like, yeah, we just circumvent the whole system. And they're just like, it's in the press and everyone's like, why isn't London doing that? And then they're like, hey, why is that? How are you allowed to do that? Why is that fair? But surely that should be how it works, right?
I think that's right. It reminded me of a story about, I met a guy who set up a small popcorn company, and
of course you did.
He was so funny. And we sat and we had an evening like drinking together, and I said, oh, how did it start? And he said, well, we entered a competition that Ben and Jerry's ran, and they said it was their centenary, it was their 10-year anniversary, and they wanted someone to come up with a way of promoting Ben and Jerry's. And he said what they did was they decided to have the Ben and Jerry's picnic. So they got 100, because it was like 10. So they got 10 by 10, so 10 meters by 10 meters of turf stored on trucks. And then they got 100 Bens and 100 Jerrys. And in the middle of the night, they got all this turf out on Trafalgar Square. So they had 100 meters square of real turf, got 100 Bens and 100 Jerrys. He changed his name by deed poll to Ben and Jerry and had like a whole picnic there. And then he said, yeah, we got second place to this like couple that had dressed up like a Ben and Jerry's ice cream after all that effort. And like I was thinking about it now, I haven't thought about that since you told me. And I was thinking, is that a failure? And what it did, he met all these like bonkers people, and it was the start of his next venture that turned into this popcorn company. And he was one of these kind of very charismatic ad guys, and
that's one of those stories you hear and you think, that's so good.
But that's how we would make our idea fly. I like that sort of something that's on the edge of lawlessness, but so creative and heartwarming that the Brits would sort of buy it. And I wonder if that, I wonder if that would tip something over the edge. And I think the Boris factor probably played against, maybe the Joanna Lumley factor played against the Garden Bridge rather than for it. And they're very, that's the fun of politics, I guess.
And I think, so there's a really cool little version of it. It's kind of similar version. And there's, I can't remember which bridge it is. The one, it's got some empty train tracks and parts of a bridge. And they would just fill that with like the High Line, basically. Just do a High Line across. It would cost 50th of the cost, super easy to do. And that's one of the ones I'm like, why is that not being built? Why is that just not going ahead?
Oh, because there's a footbridge element to the bridge it's next to, isn't there?
Yeah, but this is like it's got park benches. You can sit there, have picnic, look at the river.
Do the Garden Bridge there.
Yeah. But on an existing bridge, you just fill it full of soil and trees and planting, and I'm like, so cheap.
Are we going to really take on the political
Yes.
hot potato that is Garden Bridge 2?
But the
GBT?
High Line is like that's a big idea that was amazing, and I see. I think you and I both have the same philosophy, which is the tolerance of what is success and a failure is so close that just looking at it in a different way means that maybe in 2 years, 3 years time, you look back and it wasn't a failure, it was success. And
Totally. And people within your industry don't view things as failures that people outside your world do. They're like, you were part of this, you were part of that. They're all campaigns. And, if you do big buildings in cities, you work on like 1 in 8 becomes a building. What are the other 7 that you've got planning for? Failures? Are all those feasibility studies failures? Are all of those? No, they're stress testing, and they're kind of lottery tickets, aren't they?
I take failure really hard though. If there's anyone
I'm
listening,
surprised though, because you one so well versed in failure. There is an idea though that if you're not used to failing, that sort of 40-year-old Oxbridge Blue doesn't make senior partner, and that first major knock he gets can send you spiraling into, depression or a sad place. And actually, if you were kind of B grade student like me, or dare I say,
hello,
you,
B.
Actually, I was being nice to
C
both
plus.
of us. I think. That like resilience, that iterative failure that happens throughout your life, and actually it makes you very resilient. And I guess that word, it comes up a bit. That's what you want in your children. It's what you want in your team and your staff. This idea of like resilience, and that's self-belief, and that's not taking yourself too seriously. That's having a healthy peer group. It's all these many multitude of things, but resilience, everything. Isn't it?
And the reason I like doing the podcast is because it some of them go really well, some of them don't go as well as we thought. The ones we didn't went better than we realised.
How do you think this one's going?
Fantastic.
Okay, good.
This might be our best one. So I was looking back. Do you remember? There's a Mies van der Rohe project called the Farnsworth House.
Oh yeah, that was the first project I ever modelled on a computer.
Bring it up then. What was fascinating to me is, that's a classic. Oh my god, it's amazing. What an amazing piece of modern, like kind of new futuristic architecture back in the day.
You can reuse the wooden beams in it because the beams are clamped, so you can destruct it.
It's called. So this is called the Farnsworth House, and this is a white one. So this is one. But what was amazing is when it came out, he did it for a private client, and the client absolutely hated it. They despised the project so much. They said it was the least relaxing house, and the quote they used, it was like living like a sentinel day and night. They hated it so much that, click on that one. They sued Mies van der Rohe for that project, and then I think they won, and then Mies sued them back and won again, and it almost ruined his career because of the amount of bad publicity. But this is now to every student. You're like, what an amazing! That's the dream project.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Would I want to live in the Farnsworth House?
No, it's a.
So open. There's just windows. There's no walls.
I have.
Ben, I'll stop you there. Sharpie. Come on, move into your new house. Surprise, surprise. You've paid a architect $1 gazillion.
I mean, if you're an exhibitionist, sure, but
I
mean, it's in the middle of the woods as well.
So it's a good house for you.
Where's he looking? Yeah.
But in terms of structure and technology and just amazing design detailing, but that I always thought that was amazing. And as like you, I was like, yeah. So my first year uni project looked exactly like that, but just 3 stories high and a lot bigger. Real original. B grade
like
student.
That one
B
when I
grade
got
student.
stuck in
What's so celebrated about that, though? I don't know.
It's
probably more than the angle that we're looking at.
It's definitely the angle we're looking at. It's simplicity, and I think that thing of like that search for simplicity, isn't it? That's a kind of phrase, and that the devil's in the detail, as in to actually make things look simple when buildings are these. I mean, Mies van der Rohe, machines for living in.
Yeah. I guess you always.
I'm
start
so
off-
happy you just did that. I'm like, I don't want to say too much about why I think this is a really famous
No.
building, because I might be wrong.
But it is this idea that to make something look like two hovering planes with these very simple kind of posts.
And of course, it's a product of its time, and it's
Because at the time, this was so forward thinking, you know, the way they use full height glass and they push glass technology, and that he worked so closely with structural engineers to make sure the spans are so big, and he got everything so crisp, and like the details they use here are used to this day on like galleries and things. And but yeah, but at the time, he got
It sort of
absolutely
looks
rinsed.
like a sales pavilion.
Yeah,
For a kind of development, and then they're going to take this out, and it can go back to
Yeah.
being lawn.
But I'm to a house. I think I would absolutely hate to live in that. I have a thing about houses not being places to live. They're not galleries. Like a Zaha house would just terrify me. I like wooden homey houses. Anyway, but as a thing of failure, whereas 50 years later he's like celebrated.
Well, you know, and failure, and that to me isn't a failure in any way. Like philanthropic Americans suing each other, that doesn't mean it's a failure in any way. It was a classic at the time. It's a classic now. Failure can be.
Did you just totally just disagree with everything I just said?
Well, I try not to do it as publicly. I tell you what. How about this for a failure? Is failure ever not doing something? So Frank Gehry was a, dare I say, sort of ordinary architect up to the age of 40, working in a mainstream commercial practice, doing buildings, commercial buildings. And one of his clients said, he got close to him, was whinging to him one day in a bar. And he's like, well, if you don't like it, why are you doing it? He's like, I don't know. He's like, well, what do you really want to do? Well, I want to do these shapes. And he showed him all these drawings. And this client was like, just do it, man. Live your life. And then he became, after 40, the Frank Gehry that we know and love, and this signature motifs that he designs with. And, you know, were the first 40 years of his life of kind of failure? Were they building to become that? You know, that thing of him having the confidence then to act, and that conversation being a catalyst, that's kind of incredible. You know, and are we all capable of that in some respect? Is the failure that lack of faith in ourselves?
Yeah, I think if there's one quote from the podcast that I would love someone to listen to, it's that. There's no such thing as failure. It's just you're looking at it the wrong way.
But in the spirit of that,
Oh, why? What'd I do?
well, why don't you take on a challenge
Okay,
to show that you're not frightened of failure?
start a podcast. Sure.
And we'll put it up. We'll put it up online to show that.
Talk to me.
You know, well, we can discuss what that is, or what it. You know,
Okay.
would you like to sing, for example?
No. Well, there's just things I may.
Don't be frightened of that.
Okay.
So
do you want to sing? Do you
no,
want me to
I'm
ask
saying
you to sing?
if we're going to live, you know, practice what we preach.
Okay.
Why don't we say next week you'll sing a song?
La 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 la.
No,
la,
to
la.
show for example, it could be a sing a song. Could we do something else?
Okay, fine.
Okay,
Do whatever you want.
thanks.
Well, within reason.
Okay, excellent.
Talking of whatever you want. What did we do at lunch today? Before lunch, we had a flu jab,
Yeah.
and the business card I got. Hang on. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, maybe you can't really see that. It's a business card for a flu jab. So if you can see that, if you know what that is.
Fiona, a very charismatic Irish medical nurse who was keen to talk about prostates, and you know, she was she wanted to come on the podcast. That was the takeaway, wasn't it?
So that's a model scrotum for people who are listening. Anyway, the point was that she offered to come on the podcast and talk about men's health, and also give us, prostate exams.
Yeah.
And I thought, why not do that on the podcast? You practice what you preach, Phil. Not visual, obviously, just a bit of audio.
She did say it was a PSA test rather than a prostate examination.
What's the difference?
A PSA test is a non-invasive treatment.
Oh.
But we could do that.
on the podcast.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Possibly. Possibly.
But I do think we want to do one about health, don't we? And
Health episode. Yeah.
yeah.
There you go. Perfect.
and she had some incredible statistics and stories about men's health. And I
Yeah.
thought, not that it's just about men, but that men maybe aren't.
Well, she was busy. She was quite sort of strong on the fact that there's a minister for women's health, but there isn't a minister for men's health, and actually, the cause of suicide for men, the 70% of men, the causes of suicide relate to not having a role within a family, either their own family, either up or down. I couldn't listen to her for an hour.
No, she was quite intense.
but I would like her on for a few minutes.
After about 5 minutes of her talking, you had that look of just please give me the injection.
She was holding the flu jab, having taken all the cap off, all the sort of secret wrapping that makes it feel less like an injection, and was just sort of holding it like an old guy might wave a cigarette around, like telling a story.
I couldn't tell if you were genuinely nervous, and it was just increasingly.
She was like waffling it around, and then the odd drip was coming out, and she was telling these Irish stories about arses. And I was thinking, just
What did she say to distract? Do you remember when she was doing mine? She was like, just remember, you can't fart and whistle at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
Just before she hit me with the needle.
She told me that you sneeze at 15 miles an hour.
30 miles an hour.
No, 15, she said.
Sneeze at 50 and you fart at 80.
80, exactly. One of the most bizarre 20 minutes is I've
We
had
want
for
her
a
on the
while.
podcast, is what we're saying.
Yeah, I
For
guess
a
we
time.
do. I
Maybe
do.
we record a 5-minute segment with her when we're, hey, Bill, I'm okay, I'm all clear.
Yeah. His eyes are going red, Fiona.
So I've got to sing, and I don't want to sing. Well, I don't want to fail.
I just think that thing of like fear of failure, what's the worst going to happen? Next week, anyway.
Fine, okay, fine. How are we doing for time, Ben?
We're fine. 44.
Okay, good. I can do higher or lower now, and I've actually done some research. And hello, Soundbox.
We found him.
Don't look at my scrotum business card. That's distracting for you. So it's good to have the Soundbox back again. Got your drink?
Yes.
You ready?
Yes.
With tea in it. 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night. Okay, so we're going to go back to Centrepoint. The original budget of Centrepoint in 1966. What do you think the construction budget for the entire building was?
The construction budget of,
1966.
I would say, £40 million.
5.5 million pounds.
Wow.
Yeah, 1966.
66, of course.
Yeah, the year of the cheaper construction thing. Right now, I only looked at this from 3 months ago, so I don't know the housing market is bottomed out. But how much is the cheapest 2-bed flat in Centrepoint right now? Bearing in mind the original construction cost was 5.5 million. Higher or lower than 5.5 million?
Lower.
Yes, it's 4.9 million
Is it?
for the cheapest 2-bed. Cheapest 1-bed is 3.2 million. So, Ben, if you're interested, they're available. Going for a good price. Okay, do you know it's utterly ridiculous that you can build a 1966 skyscraper for the cost of a 2-bed flat now?
Yeah, that's the whole premise of the sort of smug baby boomers who have like just.
But do you think like our children will be like, you can't get anything for less than 30 million quid now? Not even the
because
garage.
I think there's a big, King's Cross. What Argent have done there, I think it's fantastic. And you go around in the gas holders. They're great. Like honestly, I think it's fantastic. But a 2-bedroom flat there is a couple of million quid, and you could walk for 4 minutes into the bottom of Camden, and get a huge 6-bedroom family house with a huge garden for the same. And I think why on earth would you not do? I mean, you can use all the same amenities. Yeah. I just think that's crackers. That I don't know. That for me, that's the biggest. Inflation, I kind of get the concept.
But in 30 years' time, do you think a 2-bed flat will cost 30 million quid?
No, I think things are going to change dramatically.
Ooh, serious face there. God, dark cloud over here.
Oh, maybe on
4.9 million. Okay, we are going to move on to the O2 Arena because I'm really glad you brought that up because that was a failure / biggest success ever. So 4.9 million. 4.9 is the number you're looking for. What? On a scale of 1 to 20, 1 being the biggest building in the world, in terms of volume, how big on the ranking chart, how high up is the O2 Arena, which we'll talk about in a bit.
In terms of a single volume.
Yeah. So number one, I can't remember what it is. It's like some airport in crazy stuff. But
Sure.
in terms
Is it
of the
higher
biggest
than
four,
5
no, yeah, number 5. Is it higher or lower than number 5?
out of 20?
Yeah.
Is it like
Is
lower
it,
would
is it
be
smaller?
4, 3?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, bigger is if it's 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, I think it's in the
Lower
top
down
5.
the ranking. You think it's top 5?
Yeah.
Oh, damn it! I thought you. So it's number 9 in the world is the biggest volume
Really?
building yet.
I was surprised by that. I was trying to wrong fit you.
Yeah, but it's an amazing project. Okay, we're
What are
gonna.
the other ones?
We're not going to go into that now. Another podcast for another time, Bill.
What
But
were any of the other ones?
some of them were airports, volumetric airports that are like brand new.
All bit like, yeah.
No, but the actual dome and all the additional stuff, it's massive. It's the
huge.
biggest structure. It's absolutely amazing. So,
Have you ever walked over the top?
no, have you done that?
No, let's do that.
So the O2 Arena, Millennium Dome, it was called. It's the 3rd most popular music venue in the world. It's used so often. When it first came out, it was supposed to. Here's a little question. Well, do you know what? Sod it. I'll add this into the higher or lower. It was really good. Okay, so this is a little aside. Okay, so the original cost. What do you think the original cost of the O2 Arena was? The Millennium Dome when it was first built.
Construction costs.
Construction cost, yeah. For the taxpayer, what was it supposed to be built at?
Oh, I think I remember this one, wasn't it? What, the original, like the proposed cost?
Yeah, so
60.
The
The proposed cost was 60 and then it ended up being 180 or something.
Wow, okay. But according to my half-assed Wikipedia research, the original cost to build everything, not just the dome, but the thing, is 400 million. And then the actual cost that it cost at the end was 800 million. But they were supposed, so basically they thought they'd get 10 million visitors a year, and they only got 6. So it lost them an enormous amount of money, and then they sold it, and now it's the 3rd most popular music venue in the world and makes an absolute fortune.
But isn't that thing of, you know, we
This is what we said about failure.
but
Was
like
it a failure?
but like the Battersea Power Station project, for example, it's had 5 different developers pushing it along. Someone came up with a kind of idea, someone else pushed it along, ran out of steam. The 3rd one got planning permission and then went bust. And now you've got the British Power Station Development Corporation kind of actually doing it. It's that iterative, you know, you just push it a yard forward during your watch.
What's interesting
Have they all failed?
Yeah.
Well, you know, when we're there now and next year and it all becomes open and, you know, it's on it's all of their hard work, you know.
the amount of money that's being poured into that project. So the developer almost went bust because they found asbestos in the chimneys, and you've got to take them down, get the asbestos out, and rebuild the chimneys. And they had to buy the developer had to sell it, and it got bought secretly just quite quickly. But
To the Malaysians.
so much money. Okay, so higher or lower than 9? So the Olympic 2012, that was also supposed to be a massive failure until the day it opened and everyone realised this was the best thing that ever happened to London. Higher or lower than 9? What was the original budget of the Olympics? 2012.
9.
Higher or lower than 9? Let's just say 9 billion. I'm changing the size of it.
I won't say higher.
The original...
the original budget or the actual budget?
The original.
That was projected.
You didn't listen, so
I
you
didn't.
should. You need to listen
There's
to
a
when I say a
lesson
question. 6.5 billion was the original budget. Final budget, higher or lower than 6.5? Let's just.
I think it was on budget.
It was 100% more expensive. 13 billion pounds. So let's.
No one's going to give me any major projects.
But these projects. I mean, this is the very kind of core of this podcast, is that they are deemed originally when they came out failures, and then have gone on to transform. The Olympics is amazing, the O2 Arena. They've gone on to transform how people outside of London see London.
Absolutely.
And the country.
And do you know what it's made me realise is, like, take my hat off to these visionary people who start things and who go bust in the process, and someone else comes up, picks that like rifle on, charges another like 10 yards forward and goes bust, and eventually Battersea is going to become fantastic. King's Cross was awful, it's fantastic. Shoreditch was rough, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Paddington was kind of in between. It's fantastic, and London owes a lot to these people and these kind of ideas.
I think I love London. So good. Okay, so we're gonna wrap this up now. But I just wanted to finish. I was looking about failures, and we spoke about this off the podcast. But there's
Sorry about that.
no.
You'll get over it.
Well, there's an amazing 99% Invisible podcast, and if you don't listen to it and you are listening to this podcast, you should 100% listen to this one. It's called Structural Integrity, and it's episode 110, episode 110, and it's called Structural Integrity. And basically, there's a Citicorp Center in New York. It was the 7th tallest building in all of New York, and it got built. And if you look at it, bring it up online, it's the Citicorp Center. They built it in such a way, it's got a church on the ground floor, so they could build over the church, but weren't allowed to build near it. So they built this kind of cruciform Citicorp Center in New York. And they built this kind of cruciform structure. It was revolutionary at the time. There you go, build that one there. So they built this, and at the time, the structural engineering all stacked up. And then when they did it, a couple of years after they finished it, a student emailed in and spoke to the person and was like, I think you've got your calculations wrong, because there's a 1 in 50 years storm that I think could knock your building over. And they were like, no, that wouldn't happen. We've got they've got an active damper on the top of the building. Turns out he was right. They did get it wrong because of the way the structure stacked up. And they found out that typically in a storm, it knocks the power out and the mass dampener wouldn't work. And that meant you had a 1 in 16 year chance of that being knocked over. And this is the 7th highest building in America when they did it. So they kind of snuck in at night, welded it all back up. But
it's an amazing story what they did, and the big sort of political ramification is they didn't tell anybody, and so they had an evacuation plan if there was a storm coming, but they welded it at night. And what was interesting about that was this it was lots of incremental changes, as anyone that works in building will know. It was the fact that it was bolted, not welded, and that would have been fine. And it was kind of a dozen iterative changes. And actually, when you look at the kind of the walkie-talkie, the Vignoli sort of curve, when it melted, the sun kind of caught everything at such an angle that it melted the car that parked in a particular parking spot in front of the building, because it focused the raising its convex. Actually, that was tested for, but there were so many iterative changes, and he blamed the consultants rather than sort of strange turn of events. But actually, it makes you think that at different stages in this project, you need to stop and look at first principles. That's a great photo of it.
Walkie-talkie failure. Bill, we're on the same page, mate. But what's amazing about that is that you listen to the podcast, because I'm literally just touching on it, and it gets so much more interesting. They had 2,500 Red Cross volunteers who were all there waiting. They had 4 teams monitoring 24/7 wind graphs, because there was a storm coming in and it just missed New York. And if it had hit, it would have knocked over the building. And I'm just fascinated by this idea that could have happened, because you always think, and buildings don't ever fall over, but that is not that old. And in terms of failure, I just thought that is just one of the. So it's episode 110. It's called Structural Integrity, and it is just such a good podcast. Right. So next week's topic, I've come up with a salute. I've come up with a thought.
Okay.
I want to call it the classics. Mm-hmm. Don't nod your head like that. It's a great idea.
Yeah, it's not like. Okay, it's a great one.
So episode 7, classics. I'm going to talk about. We're going to discuss.
Why don't you? Can we say it like classics reimagined or something?
Oh, I forgot. All right, fine. Classics brackets reimagined.
No,
Redux.
Hashtag
reimagined.
No, colon. I mean.
Oh.
Classics
What?
colon.
No?
Not like that.
Okay.
We don't need Fiona for this
Okay.
one. Classics.
You're making it sound like a really bad sequel. Classics.
I just think
the rebuild.
When you're sitting and you say you're on a Saturday night and you think, should we watch a film?
Yeah.
Should we watch a classic? No.
Yes.
No.
Let's watch a classic.
Let's watch something new.
No.
Let's watch Die Hard again.
Oh, there's a really good Rewatchables episode.
Great.
Do you have any examples of failure, Ben? I was going to put you on the spot.
No.
I'm looking at him shaking his head. Please don't ask me.
We haven't. Do you know what? We are wrapping this up, but we haven't talked about any personal failures.
Well,
Bill, you're dying to talk about your personal failures. I know
you touched on a personal failure in the pub, and we all agreed that maybe that wasn't PC for this podcast.
I think it's important to sort of, to show that.
Bill, look, you're in the nest. Basically, we're 55 minutes into a podcast.
I don't think
only the core listeners are listening. You can talk about.
I have a close friend.
He's called
Phil.
He's called Phil.
Phil. No, I do have a close friend that isn't a euphemism for myself.
Of course.
We once went for a drink, and he said, "Oh, have you ever had like? Has there ever been a pivotal moment where your career, you knew you'd done irreparable damage to your career?" I said, I don't think there has, Phil. And he said, he said he joined this company and he was going really well, and he'd been there for 5 years, and he was very friendly with the boss. But then his personal life had started to kind of...
I'm so into the story. Let me lean.
started to like get a bit out of hand. But he's sort of late 20s, but he was kind of on the way up, but masking a kind of quite wild private life as well. And then he was meant to be going on this big trip, like a conference in America with the boss and these other people. And they'd been like, "You've got your passports, got your passports." And then he realised, like, he woke up incredibly hungover, and then like came in and realised with all of them going through the stuff out at the airport that his passport had expired like a month ago. And the boss could see he was incredibly hungover and just like left him there, this like broken, dejected man who took all the other successful, aspirational executives off to this.
Oh no!
And left him behind with this terrible kind of headache to go back to his like flat in West Kensal. And he said that was sort of it. And then afterwards, it was a year like before he realised that he was never going to get back and had to leave. And it was like,
I just think,
and he was like, he could pinpoint that kind of moment.
I just think the idea, when you wake
Phil,
up on a
if you're
Sunday,
listening, you know who you are.
You wake up on a Sunday night and you remember a horrible memory, and to be able to pinpoint an exact time when your career may have taken a bit of a nosedive. Yeah. I mean, that's the akin to like missing a penalty, isn't it? That's the.
Oh, and we haven't talked about Gareth Southgate, Mr. Failure, missed the penalty in Euro 96, and now he's the most popular manager England have ever had. He's overseeing a golden reign in England, English football. I mean, he is Mr. Success and compassion, and he is overcoming failure Gareth. If you listen,
when you listen, come on the show, talk to us.
Do you think he'd come?
Yeah, definitely. Why wouldn't he? Because he's a really famous.
Do you want to shout out old Peter Crouch as well?
Oh, name drop! Boom. We were having a little pre-drink warm-up in the pub, and bloody Peter Crouch came out of the function room.
And a horrible pub as well.
Yeah,
like a really...
Can I say which one it is? No one's going to listen, right?
No, you can't say that.
Why not?
Well, I've just called it horrible and we like to go in there.
Okay. It's one of the proper pubs, isn't it? It's got a carpet and you're like, who's putting
a
carpet in
and a fire, and the carpet has never been cleaned. Yeah. And it's sort of, you're like, my shoes, tacky. Anyway, Crouchy in a suit comes out the function room.
What is he doing in that pub? It's such a dump, isn't it?
He was really moving though when he came through.
It was so good. Oh, do you remember when we saw Peter Andre in a Ferrari, literally outside our work, and we pointed his Ferrari, and he thought we were pointing at him, and he went, "Hi,"
and he smiled, and he was cute with it because he's nice, Peter Andre.
He's a lovely guy.
Poor Peter Andre. Can we have celebrity spot?
Oh, definitely. Okay, that was a great celebrity spot.
We work in a good area.
Who did you see from Arrested Development?
Tobias Funke. That was a top spot. Honestly, I started grinning when I said that's a sign of,
Architecture and celebrity spot. Email in, tell us. Anyway, so mine's going to be called The Classics. Okay, episode 7. Is it 7?
The Classics reimagined.
So we're building up to the Christmas special. I'm not allowed to talk about it, but it's
It's within touching distance.
kind of a big deal. So is this it? Are we? Is there any else? Any other stories you want to talk about? What about the story in the pub that you told us? Because that was very amusing.
Another day. Another day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.